What does it take to kill a stranger for money? Not in a high-budget action movie, not in a hyper-realistic video game, but in real life. To wake up in the morning, pour a coffee, receive a name, a face, and a location, and then make the conscious decision to end a human being's existence. Most people struggle to imagine the logistics of such a life. For the average person, the mere thought of violence triggers powerful emotional reactions: fear, guilt, anxiety, and profound empathy. Our brains are biologically designed to resist harming members of our own species. Even professional soldiers throughout history have reported hesitation before pulling the trigger, even when their own survival was on the line. Yet, some individuals seem capable of crossing that line repeatedly. They do it without visible remorse or emotional collapse. So, what happens inside the mind of a person who kills for a living? Are they born fundamentally different, or is there a dark mechanism at play? Psychologists, criminologists, and investigators have spent decades decoding this. What they discovered is more disturbing than the tropes of monsters or sociopaths. The mind of a professional killer is often not driven by rage, hatred, or even a love for violence. Sometimes it is driven by something simpler, colder, and more human. And that is where this investigation begins. Part 1. The human brain is not built to kill. Most assume violence is a natural part of the human condition. After all, history is filled with conflict. But evolutionary psychology reveals an optimistic truth. Humans possess ingrained mechanisms that strongly discourage us from harming our own species. Empathy, guilt, and emotional attachment are critical biological systems that act as internal brakes. They create resistance that is remarkably difficult to override. Researchers who studied combat soldiers during the Second World War observed that many experienced long-term psychological trauma when forced to take a life. This suggests that killing requires overcoming deep-seated, primitive emotional barriers. This raises a vital question. If most of us are hardwired to protect life, how do some bypass these barriers so effectively? It isn't always a lack of feeling, it is often a mastery of avoiding the feeling. They view the act through a lens that excludes the natural human response to suffering. Part 2. Why? The power of compartmentalization. One answer appears repeatedly in violent criminal psychology: compartmentalization. This is the sophisticated ability to mentally separate one's actions from one's emotions. Instead of seeing a human being with a history and a future, the target is reduced to a task. They become an objective, a logistical problem to be solved. Psychologists describe this as emotional distancing. The less personal a victim feels, the easier the action becomes. This is a defensive mechanism the brain uses to survive uncomfortable situations. The individual does not stop understanding right from wrong. They simply place those thoughts into a strictly different mental compartment that remains locked during the act. The more often this is repeated, the more efficient the lock becomes, making the unthinkable seem like mere routine. It is a form of cognitive dissonance that allows them to maintain a normal life on one side of their mind while executing a monstrous act on the other. Part 3. Moral disengagement. Psychologist Albert Bandura introduced moral disengagement, a process that allows people to commit harmful acts without experiencing the crushing weight of guilt. Instead of changing behavior to match their morals, the mind changes the story. Responsibility is shifted away from the perpetrator. Consequences are minimized, victims are dehumanized, and the act is justified as a necessity. This appears throughout history whenever groups commit atrocities while convincing themselves their actions are acceptable. For a professional killer, moral disengagement is a survival strategy. Maintaining a normal moral framework while taking lives creates unmanageable conflict. By viewing the victim as an object or a bad person who deserves it, they bypass their own conscience. They redefine the act as a service or a cleanup, stripping away the moral sting. Part 4. The role of emotion. A persistent myth is that hitmen feel nothing. The reality is more complex. Research on violent offenders suggests emotional experiences vary. Some exhibit signs of psychopathy, reduced empathy, lack of remorse, and shallow responses. But others experience anxiety, fear, or nightmares, yet they have learned to suppress them entirely. The absence of visible emotion does not always mean the absence of emotion itself. Often it means feelings have been buried or strictly disconnected from the task. They are not necessarily emotionless, they are emotionally detached. They quarantine their feelings so they can function in a world we would find terrifying. They force their brain to ignore emotional input, acting as if they are performing a standard job function. Some report a flow state, where all cognitive resources are directed at the technical requirements, leaving no room for emotional processing. Part 5. When killing becomes a job. The most disturbing shift occurs when violence becomes routine. Humans are adaptable, even to experiences that once felt deeply shocking. Over time, constant repetition reduces emotional intensity. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. The unimaginable becomes familiar. What once felt morally impossible gradually begins to feel procedural. This is the danger of desensitization. When you repeat an action enough times, the brain stops firing the danger signals it once did. The individual's relationship to the act changes, and in that change, the last remnants of their original conscience often fade. The act is no longer killing, it is finishing a contract. This linguistic shift is crucial. By framing their world in terms of contracts, tasks, and completions, they insulate themselves from the visceral reality of ending a life. Part 6. Are they born or made? Researchers have debated this for decades. Are some born for violence, or is it an environmental product? The truth is a mix of both. Personality traits and biological predispositions matter, but childhood experiences, social influences, and a lack of better opportunities play a massive role. There is no universal formula. One pattern appears consistently. Extreme behavior rarely emerges from a single cause. It develops in layers: biology, environment, and a series of escalating decisions. It is the result of a long, slow drift away from the moral center. They do not wake up one day and choose to kill. They make a series of small, compromising choices that eventually lead to that point. This drift is the most frightening element. It is a gradual erosion of self, where each step makes the next more plausible until the original version of the self is unrecognizable. Part 7. The social mirror. It is also essential to consider the social context. Professional killers often exist in subcultures where violence is rewarded. They are often surrounded by people who validate their choices. This social reinforcement creates an echo chamber that makes it harder to retain a conventional moral compass. If everyone you know treats the act as a normal business transaction, you are far more likely to do the same. Our environment acts as a mirror. If that mirror reflects a world without consequences, our internal landscape will eventually adjust. Final takeaway: the unsettling truth about the psychology of a professional killer is not that they are monsters, it is that they are human. Human beings possess a terrifying ability to adapt, to justify, to compartmentalize, and to disconnect actions from consequences. Under the right circumstances, those abilities can lead to very dark places. This is not just a story about contract killers. It is a lesson about the psychological mechanisms that allow harm to occur anywhere. History shows that the greatest dangers begin with small, insignificant acts of emotional distancing. The moment another person stops feeling like a person and starts feeling like an object, a target, or an obstacle, the barrier disappears. When empathy vanishes, almost anything becomes possible. Never underestimate how easily the human mind can justify the unjustifiable. The true horror isn't that they are different, it's that they are a version of us that has turned off the light. We all have the capacity for compartmentalization, and understanding that is the first step toward ensuring we never use it for the wrong reasons. The light is always there, but it takes constant effort to keep it on.